come out tonight. And I want to thank Siemens and also Marty for the opportunity to talk about Neuros and also talk about how Neuros kind of came about. So a little bit about myself as we get into the talk called Building a Bio-Enterprise. How I got here, I was employee number 100 with Steris Corporation back in '92 and spent about 8 years there in a variety of roles in sales and marketing, operations experience, both domestically and internationally. I tell everybody I got about 3 MBAs worth of experience at Steris, which is great. Also went to a company called Cyberonics, and Cyberonics is developing a implantable technology for patients with epilepsy. And it uses electrical stimulation, and it stimulates a nerve in the neck called the vagus nerve. Very successful for patients with epilepsy and also depression. After that, was also at a company called Immelux, a small startup in Cleveland for a few years in the mid-2000s. It was an imaging technology. And then finally, a very big company called Cardinal Health, about 55,000 employees, and I was a marketing lead for their medical products manufacturing division. And so every morning from corporate down in Columbus, we used to get an email out to all the managers, and it would tell us everything that was going on with the space as far as the medical device and the healthcare space, also telling us about new approvals, FDA approvals, those sorts of things. Also talked about financings and fundraising activity. And this one morning I was reading it, it was in October of '07, and it said that Ohio led the Midwest in healthcare investments. So here I had moved to Chicago for a lot of opportunity with Cardinal Health, which is a great company, a very large company, but all the true growth and the new activity was really happening back in Cleveland. So shortly after that, convinced my wife Connie and the kids, they thought I was punking them, but we actually moved back to Cleveland and joined a group called Bio-Enterprise. And as Bio-Enterprise, it's in Northeast Ohio here in Cleveland, and I was their first CEO in residence. And this role was specifically focused on a couple things. You either go to a local medical company who could use some senior leadership, or you find technology and you really build that vision, build that case for that technology, form a company, and move it forward. And so I took the latter path, and what I focused on was an area called neuromodulation or neurostimulation. It's basically using electrical stimulation for a therapeutic effect for patients. And so this happens in areas like spinal cord stimulation, functional electrical stimulation to let patients, after they've had a stroke, retain their grasp, those sorts of things. So it really consists of a couple components. They're about the size of a watch. So our device here in the middle, it's called a generator, and that produces an electrical signal for the patient, and that actually attaches to a small wire called a lead, which attaches to a nerve in the body. And so this technology itself was really focused on blocking the nerve signal where it was delivered. So about day 3 of being in the CEO in residence role, I was their first one at Bio-Enterprise and basically put together my plan of how I was going to put a company together. So in 2008 in Q1, I really wanted to realize what's out there as far as technology to look at and also to bring in and license a company around. So I talked to a variety of folks at Case, also talked to folks, a variety of institutions throughout the US, University of Texas, Minnesota, Toronto, Europe, just to find out what was out there in the world of neuromodulation that could be licensed in to take a company forward with. I also had to understand the status of the development. A lot of this technology was just basically an invention at the idea stage. Really was not in any humans yet, perhaps some animal testing or preclinical testing at that point. I also had to understand what the patent situation was on this. Basically the intellectual property, where did it stand? Was this something that was going to be protected if this would go to market? And then I had to talk to VCs or venture capital firms who were investing in companies like this to see what they looked for, to understand what stage this technology would be at, where they would find this attractive. And then also look at seed funding sources. So in Ohio, we have Ohio Third Frontier, which is a great initiative. And it's been funding groups like Jumpstart and Case Tech Ventures, Glengarry, which is a VC firm here in Cleveland, a variety of angel funds in Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. And as a result, there are some great areas where you can get your initial funding to get your company up off the ground and move it through its initial paces. So I really had to come up to speed with this and focus on these things in the first quarter. Q2, I had to continue to refine and engage researchers. Many times I would meet with one researcher case one day, the next day I was meeting with their neighbor to understand where their technology stood. I also had to go through and basically rank the various opportunities out there in a variety of areas as far as really kind of put an analysis together so that I could understand what the strongest technologies were. And then with that, continue to build the value proposition of the technology, and then also really understand the market. So continue to refine the opportunity of the company that was eventually going to become Neuros here. And so the areas that I focused on, we obviously had to look at a variety of them. And one of them was the clinical application. So what specifically was it looking at? What was the medical need for the patient and the physician? What's the market size? Is it growing? Is it contracting? What's the product characteristics? Does this have to be a very small device? Does it have to be completely implanted? And also the researchers. So initially when I was talking to researchers, some were very engaged in moving the technology forward. Others not as much motivated. And so that was very important as well. We wanted to make sure we were partnering with somebody who was going to be very motivated to get this to patients. And we really found that in our technology here with Kevin Kilgore and Niloy Bajra from Case Western. Also, from an intellectual property standpoint, some of this technology had no IP around it, had no patents. So if you were going to take it and go to market, you were really betting that, number one, you were going to get a patent issued, and number two, that it was going to be strong. We also had to look at the competition, what was currently out there, but also what was in development, and then also what their IP position was. And then finally, what's the treatment options that are going to be competing with your technology as you move this forward? And then other development changes or challenges with the technology. And finally, investability. Will somebody invest in this technology, give you the funding so you can go ahead and move forward and continue to develop it? So then around Q3, Q4 of 2008, I continued to refine this and really focus on the next steps and milestones in order to get this technology through its paces, and then understand the business vision. So really map out with milestones and move it forward. And then develop the business plan, realize the funding requirements to support the initiative there, and then also focus on those funding sources. So it could be equity, non-equity, strategic partners, so other industry companies, and really move forward and secure the financing to move ahead here. So all this was basically my plan. It was very organized with milestones and tactics, and I would review it daily and bounce ideas off of a variety of folks at BioEnterprise and other folks throughout the industry, just to continue to vet it and make sure that it was solid in order to have a real true bona fide opportunity here. But let's go back to what's happening in 2008. So I like to call this the good, the bad, and the ugly slides. So the good, LeBron was still in Cleveland, and I've had to change this slide the first time. Cliff Lee was a Cy Young winner. He was a 22-3 record, 2.54 ERA. Michael Phelps won 8 gold at the Beijing Olympics, and unemployment was 5.75%. So that's what was going on. That was good. The bad, obviously, the Great Recession. So I'll talk about our impact or the timing of this in a moment here. But it's basically the worst economy since the Great Depression. Global market fallout. Everything's falling apart with regards to banks closing, venture capital firms no longer investing in anything that's called a venture. So basically, venture is being removed from their name. They're looking at later stage opportunities, areas that we were actually targeting as far as funders. Those folks basically headed for the hills. And then finally, the ugly. Obviously, the Great Recession, again, worst economy, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, the Fed bailout, too big to fail, and some names that you don't really hear anymore about, Lehman Brothers, AIG, and Stearns. Basically, it's a great time to form a company. So I started doing some research about other companies that were formed during recessions, and I realized there are some pretty notable names here, and so I thought, if these folks can do it, maybe there's an opportunity for us to do it as well. And I also did a little research to find out a number of companies that are in the Fortune 500 that were actually formed during a recession. If you look at here, the great majority or good portion of the companies were actually formed during a recession as well. So I thought we actually had a fighting chance to move forward. And really, when you form a company, you can't wait for the exact best moment, because sometimes that'll pass you by, and you really have to put the stake in the sand and move forward. And so October 22nd of 2008, Neuros was incorporated. on paper. And so with that, we will add Neuros to this list of companies. So at Neuros, what we're focusing on is developing an implantable neuromodulation technology that essentially provides on-demand therapy for a patient. They use a small remote control about the size of a TV remote, but the components are all implanted. So you see this device on the top called a generator or stimulator, and it provides a very high frequency for the patient, higher than what's currently on the market. And that's the true difference with what we're doing here. Delivering a very high frequency to the nerve, and as a result, we can really stop that nerve from transmitting where we deliver it. So it's attached to an electrode, which then attaches to the nerve, which is yellow in the illustration. And our first target market is amputation pain or phantom limb pain or stump pain. Very large markets, very large market size here in the US, about 2 million total amputees here in the US. And those numbers are going to continue to grow basically due to vascular disease and diabetes. So they're projecting that 2 million patient number to grow by about 2050 to double. So again, this will be continue to be a very large market going forward. New patients alone is about 100,000 new patients that present with this chronic post-amputation pain, and it's very debilitating. Nothing really works for these patients when they try a variety of treatments. So our market's very large. Dollar-wise, it's probably about a $16 billion market, so pretty formidable market size. But it also has applications in other areas as well. So what we're really treating is cut nerve or damaged nerve pain. That's what patients who have an amputation, they have muscle cut, they have tissue cut, bones cut, but you also cut nerve. And when you cut nerve, a very debilitating condition called neuroma will grow in that cut tip of the nerve there. So the technology so far has been through 2 studies, and it's been used for about 4 years to date. I'll get into our data in a moment. But it's been very, very significant with regards to the pain reduction that it's causing or creating for these patients. But also, it's provided a very significant narcotic pain medication reduction as well for patients. Patients have actually used this about 4,300 times. They use a small remote control to turn the device on. And it's very robust, very consistent now for about 4 years of use. We are currently in what's called a pivotal study, which is basically the final study that we will use in order to get through FDA approval in about 2 years. And we just recently completed what's called an interim analysis. And so this is an analysis of the first 20 patients. It's performed by a third-party data monitoring committee who looks at the study. They look at a variety of things such as safety and efficacy, but also they look at enrollment, and they also look at patient adherence or compliance with the study as well. And then they give you some feedback. They'll say, continue on, or they'll say, yeah, you should pause and look at the data, or they should say you should pause and forget your study, or they'll say you should pause and maybe adjust your protocol. So we just announced the other day that we successfully closed or completed this milestone, and actually the data monitoring committee, their feedback to us was continue on, which was great news. So it's great to have that key milestone completed here. So we'll continue to enroll patients and move forward with the study. We've also had about $13 million in revenue or in investment so far into the company, a variety of funders from Jumpstart and Case Tech Ventures to North Coast Angel Fund, Ohio Tech Angel Fund, Queen Cities in Cincinnati. Also some regional VCs with Rivervest, but also a couple of very significant medical device companies called Great Batch Medical and also Boston Scientific have invested as well. So we've raised about $13 million to date. We're actually raising some more funding in a startup or a pre-revenue company. You're always raising, so we'll continue with that. And then in about 2 years, we should have enough data in order to get FDA approval as we move ahead here. So you look at what's happening on these nerves. When you have a procedure, either an amputation, this also presents in other procedures as well, so knee and hip repair, mastectomy, hernia, opening of the chest, thoracotomy. Many times you get the same sort of pain condition presenting for these patients as well. So you've cut the nerve, and basically these ball-like benign tumors will grow on the nerve and cause a very debilitating pain sensation. And so as you see the causes of the amputation here with diabetes and peripheral vascular disease, these numbers are just going to continue to grow, and it's truly an underserved patient population. So after 2009, when we raised our first round of funding of just short of $2 million, in 2010 we had to develop our first device which is basically a small black box. And then in 2011, we got through our first study, which was a 5-patient study in order to show if this could work. So this is very high frequency, much higher than what's currently on the market. There have been a lot of great animal testing, preclinical testing done at Case in order to confirm that they could block the nerve activity, but the rat can't communicate what their pain level is. So you really had to get into humans to see if this was going to work. So we did our first in-man study down in Dayton, and it was a 30-day study per patient, and we implanted them with that little electrode, and then we had this small black box that basically attached to the device, and the patient turned it on, and they recorded their pain before they used it, and they recorded their pain after they used it. And what we saw was very significant. Number one, it was very tolerable, so the patients didn't jump out of the chair, which was great. The patients also, when they used it, they had significant pain reduction. We saw patients go from a 6, 7, or 8 on a 0 to 10 scale down to a 0, 1, or 2. And if you talk to a pain physician, to get somebody at a 0, 1, or 2 is just phenomenal. Usually you don't see that at all. And then we also realized that this device doesn't need to be on 24 hours a day. So all that key learning, all that key finding really helped us to understand what this smaller device needed to look like and what it needed to do. So we moved forward with a FDA-approved study of 10 patients for about 12 months per patient. And we saw very similar results. Out of those 10 patients, 7 were responders. Again, reduced them from a 6 down to a 1 on average on a 0 to 10 scale. And then we also greatly reduced their narcotic pain medication usage. So out of those 7 responders, 5 used narcotic pain meds. Of those 5 users, 4 completely discontinued and 1 reduced by about 50%. So that has significant impact for patients, not only from a quality of life standpoint, but also from a health economic standpoint as well. So we're developing a system, bringing it into the market, and we hope to also remove costs from the market by reducing the actual narcotic pain medication usage there. We also wanted to track and see how long it took before the patients actually had to use the device again. And we noticed it was several hours after they used the device, after it ran for 30 minutes, before they needed to use it again. So that told us maybe we're breaking the cycle of pain for these patients with the technology. So the patients then, per FDA approval, were allowed to still use the device, so they still use the device and are still reporting significant pain reduction. So this chart here kind of shows 4 key areas that we present to folks when we talk about our data. And so there are various bars and there are various time intervals. So going from left to right, it's kind of different parts of the study. So the maroon bar is the first 3 months of a study, or called a primary endpoint of the study. So the top basically shows the amount of pain reduction for the patients. So these patients are reporting anywhere from a 75 to maybe 80% pain reduction when they would use the device, which is very significant. But then we also tracked how many times when they used it did it actually produce that significant pain reduction. So again, nearly 80% of the time when they used it, it produced a very significant pain reduction for these patients. Top right shows the actual pill count per patients per week. So the gray bar is the baseline, and so patients here are around 17, 18 pills per week. And as you can see, they're significantly reduced in that first bar after the gray bar, and then throughout the various time intervals. So, for example, this is the most recent follow-up as of December of 2015. And you can see the pill counts basically almost nothing, which is phenomenal for these patients. And then also quality of life scales down below. So the key here is that it just really shows that this therapy works, and we haven't seen any major tail off or lack of durability over time. And so these patients now, again, they've used it for 4 years, and they're turning that device on about 4,300 times total now. So it's just phenomenal data that we are continuing to work from. When we compare the technology to others that are currently in the market, such as spinal cord stimulation or peripheral nerve stimulation that have been tried for this specific clinical market or amputation area, we're about 2.5 times more effective than these other technologies. We're at about a 78% responder rate, and these others are only around 30%. So again, shows that we're very effective in reducing these patients' pain. And actually, we've had patients who have had these other devices implanted, and they've actually had them taken out in order to enroll in our current study, which just continues to show the true underserved need for these patients. So the numbers are great to show you the pain reduction numbers, 0 to 10 on a 0 to 10 scale, but the real quality of life impact and what this has had for patients, but also their caregivers and their family members, is even more impactful. So this is a short video, and one of our patients from our pilot, he's going to talk about, and you'll hear his wife off camera. You'll hear her comments as well as far as what it's been like to be using the therapy.
What has been the most impact that this type of stimulation therapy has had on your life, and how has it really improved your quality of living?
Well, it knocks the pain down to right away.
He used to be not very talkative when he had constant pain. I don't know if he was focusing on the pain or what, but he was not very talkative. Since we've been involved in this and he gets relief from the pain, he's more conversational.
And once you use the stimulator and you turn it on, what is the effect that it has?
Well, the pain gets less and less, and it can go clear down to zero, no pain.
And before you had our stimulator and before you used it, did you ever have this amount of pain relief before with any of the medications or anything else?
None.
So this has been different, and it's been a real improvement for you.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I guess the last question we have here, just generally with your whole attitude towards things and how you're living your life now, has this made a positive improvement for you?
Yes. Feel like doing more things. She tells me I am, so.
He is. He's more engaged than what he was before. It was almost, for a while there, like the pain was consuming him. And that's all he could think about, whereas now he thinks of so many other things.
Very good. And if another patient were to talk to you and they're wondering, should I try this? And I'm having pain, does it work? What would you tell that patient?
I tell them, yeah, sure it works. Yeah.
And you'd recommend it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it certainly has helped him.
Well, very good. That's sort of what we wanted to cover. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things, we have 3 daughters, and before he started with the stimulator, they used to say, after we had a family get together, they'd say, "Dad's just like a shell of a man with nothing inside." Now they're not saying that anymore. He's there again.
So again, it's always great to hear in their own words what it's been like to use the therapy and the impact that it's been providing to their quality of life. So if you remember when I was looking at all the different technologies out there, the 24 different technologies, and kind of ranked them all after I did the analysis, one of the key things was IP, or patents. And right about the time we were licensing this in, the first patent issued, which was great. Since then, we've added to that with 8 more, and now we have 9 total issued patents, 6 in the US and 3 outside the US, with a variety of claims and coverages. So we're very much clear to do what we need to do. And also, we've been able to keep competitors out of those areas as well as we move forward. And then finally, reimbursement. So having a technology that's FDA approved eventually is great, but you won't be able to really launch that technology without adequate reimbursement. So we think this will fall under current reimbursement codes. And if you look at the potential to reduce narcotic pain medication, this could have a payback in about 3 years. Most patients spend about $4,000 to $5,000 annually on their narcotic pain meds. Selling a $16,000 system to the hospital. Eventually, you can get those patients off pain meds and have a nice reduction to the overall system there. So our current study, which is our pivotal study, is currently underway. We're at about 15 sites here in the US. It's going to be about a 100-patient study. You see some of the logos of some of the various sites that we're engaged with. And the design of the study is called a randomized controlled trial. So you have a control group and you have a treatment arm, and you compare the differences between the two as far as how they respond. So the treatment arm will get the high-frequency nerve block therapy, and the control arm will get something different than that. And then we'll compare the groups and most likely have an effective study and successful study in about a couple of years here. And so we're going to study the patients for about 3 months initially, and we follow them for another 9 months for safety, just to make sure there's no issue with safety with the device as we go ahead here. And so as a company, like I mentioned, we've raised about $13 million, and we're raising another $13 to $15 million. It's called a Series C. With that, we will get through the rest of this study, get through FDA approval, also get what's called CE mark, and that'll allow us to potentially launch outside the US if we'd like to, and also gets us over the FDA goal line in 2018 here. So what I like to tell people is that we are on the 5-yard line. We're about to get over the goal line. It's going to take about 2 years to do so, but we're not on our own 20, just to get an idea of where we're at kind of in the whole development phase here. So the technology, it's not a one-trick pony. It can really be applied to a variety of other areas as well. So wherever you have a cut nerve or damaged nerve, so patients have this, as I mentioned before, with chronic post-surgical pain. You've had knee and hip repair, you've had an opening of the chest, mastectomy, you've had hernia. Many times you cut nerves just because of the surgery. And because of that, you'll get a very similar sort of pain condition to what these patients have with amputation pain. We also feel this could maybe be applied to an area of migraine called occipital neuralgia. There's a couple nerves at the back of the neck there where patients are currently getting injections of lidocaine, and we're providing a very similar effect of lidocaine, basically a very similar effect electronically for patients. So there's another area that we could explore as well as we continue to go forward here. And then as a company, we'll see what happens with regards to our being independent, but most companies in our space actually get picked up by a bigger company, a bigger medical device company, before they launch. And you can see there's been quite a lot of activity in our specific area of neurostimulation. And again, most here, except for the top 2, didn't have any US revenue. So it tells you most companies will most likely get acquired by a bigger company, and as a result of that, basically plug that technology into their sales and marketing distribution chain, and investors benefit from that. Those investors then will invest in other companies in the area, Northeast Ohio area, and continue to support new technology growth there. So this is kind of an answer to the question of how do you build a bioenterprise. Number one, utilize as many available resources as you can, and I did that. I talked to everybody who I could get my hands on, both locally and throughout the world, just to really continue to vet what we were doing. Use your mentors, incubators, industry experts to do so, and really focus and develop a strategic plan. Many folks develop a business plan, and it sits right up there on the shelf, and it gets dusty. And it never gets used again, it never gets used as far as a measurement tool. It's very important to make sure you're tracking on time, and if you're not, you need to find out why and adjust your plan as you go forward there. Also, you got to make sure it's investable. It's what we call the 4-legged stool. We look at things such as the market, so good size market, management, who's leading the company forward, who's leading the technology forward as far as the management team, the actual product itself, and how well is that product protected, such as IP. And then finally, the financials. Will somebody actually invest in your technology to help you move it forward there? The next one is very key: focus, determination, and dedication. Staying very focused. Those are things that I learned when I was at Steris, working with Bill Sanford. If you look at our mission and goal statements, the business and management philosophies, the rule of 6 that we had, that didn't change from day 1 to 8 years later when I left the company. And so it was very consistent with regards to what we needed to do. And so with that, we were very focused as a company. So it's very important to have that same sort of focus and determination and dedication. It's not always a straight line in taking a company forward, and so you have to be extremely resilient to move it ahead there. Again, continue to use your resources and contacts. Just never know where one phone call or introduction may take you. And also humility. Know what you don't know. Many times, I'll look at things and I'll think, well, I think I know about that, but then it's also important to say, well, do I really know everything I need to know on that? Who do I need to bring in as a resource? Or who do I need to offload and delegate something to who's even more effective with that? So for example, I couldn't be a CTO, I probably couldn't be a CFO at the company, and so as a result of that, I bring good folks in who have that sort of knowledge base and can really be successful in those areas. Then finally, execute your plan. Stay focused on your plan. Assess how you're doing. Adjust if you need to. Nothing wrong with that. And then finally, be resilient. And we're not over the goal line yet. We're close, but it's going to be another couple of years, and we'll be there with FDA approval. But then there will be even more challenges. Continue to launch technology and move it forward. So those are kind of the areas that we focus on with regards to how do you build a bioenterprise. But I think you also need extreme support from certain folks. And so I want to thank my wife, Connie, for all of her support over the many years, but also allowing us to move back to Cleveland after we had moved everybody to Chicago, because that would not have happened, and Neuros would not be where it's at today. And this technology would not be helping patients out there, and eventually thousands of patients as well. So with that, I just want to thank you for your time. Happy to tell the Neuro story to anybody who will listen. And with that, I think we'll take some questions. It's implanted. So there's a lithium-ion battery inside of it, and that runs, since it's high frequency, it has a big power draw. And so it's a lithium-ion battery, and basically the patient will recharge it. We tell them recharge once a week, but they really don't need to go that effectively. They can probably go every 2 months and recharge it. Yep. So that's a great question. So what we provide is a very similar effect to lidocaine. And we actually have a screening before a patient goes forward for the implant, and we inject lidocaine, or the physician does, on the nerves. And so if you look at the target market, 93% of the patients in this market are lower limb amputees. And they're either below knee or above knee amputees. So for a below knee amputee, you're going to have two nerves just behind the back of the knee here that we'll target. And for an above knee amputee, you're going to have the sciatic nerve. And so there's really clear focused areas where we would block. So we actually inject lidocaine. If a patient gets 50% or greater reduction to that, then they move forward to implant. If they don't, that tells us the pain is probably not originating here, maybe more of a central pain, maybe more in the CNS then, and then they don't move to implant. But what we provide then is a very similar pain reduction to that lidocaine when they actually use the device. Yep. Yeah, so, and surprisingly, there's a small amount. You would think there would be hundreds of thousands of patients who are trauma, but there's probably about 2,800 from the two wars, Afghanistan and Iraq there. But we actually talked with them early on, and we've received DoD funding and U.S. Army funding as well, as far as some grant funding from there. And we wanted to perform our first study with them at Walter Reed. And so we were in Walter Reed in 2009 when we were moving forward. And if you remember, the Veterans Administration had some bad PR about treatment of vets then, and ironically, it came back recently too. But unfortunately, they didn't want to take an experimental device at that point and move it forward with their patients at that stage. But since then, we've actually engaged with the local VA. So Stokes VA is one of our clinical sites for our pivotal study. Right, so the folks who really treat these patients are interventional pain physicians or pain specialists, and also physical medicine and rehabilitation groups. So those specialties, we basically engage with them at a variety of conferences, a variety of publications. We also right now are really direct to the patient. And so we have quite a lot of social media out there with Facebook and Google, and patients contact us daily. We've had several hundred actually reach out to us to be part of the study. And then we also have some great key opinion leaders involved with the study as well. So when this study is over and we have the published paper, and you look at all the key opinion leaders and the right institutions up there, it's going to be really a true, bona fide, respected study out there. But when we are FDA approved, and we will then start marketing to actual physicians and the prescribers then. Yeah, we haven't seen that. And basically our device, I don't have a picture here, but the black recharging disc is right over the skin, right over the shirt. So it doesn't have to be on the skin itself. So it can recharge through the clothing. So yeah, there's no irritation or anything like that for the patient. That's a great question. So a lot of our folks on the team, we have about a dozen people. And at one point, everybody was an engineer, even our CFO. I was the only non-engineer at the company. Even our admin at the time was an engineer, and she had switched careers and got into accounting. But a couple of things. We look for, since we're a small group, we want to make sure that this person is going to be, number one, a really good fit in the team. If you have 10, 11, 12 people in an office, you're very close-knit, and you want to make sure that there aren't a whole lot of bulls in the china shop, so to speak. So, having somebody on board who's a good team member is very important from a training standpoint or a background standpoint. Going forward now, we have a really good clinical and R&D team, and one of them is here tonight. We also, as we go forward, we want to have some additional members of the team as far as VP of Market Development, VP of Reimbursement, also some field clinical specialist roles, basically clinicians that will work with the sites and help to manage those patients go through the process for a study. So when you look at that, you want somebody who's done that before, who's been involved with other medical devices and other implantable technologies. And also technologies that have been through studies before, because it's a different sort of mindset. There's certain things you can and can't say. You also want to make sure that you're not unblinding a patient, for example, that they are one of the two groups, and you want to have them understand which of the two groups they're in. You want to make sure that they're well blinded to that. So having that sort of sensitivity is very important as well, as far as patient engagement. So we kind of look at all those things. Again, we have a lot of BMEs, biomedical engineers on staff, variety of levels from PhD down to undergrad. And then we also look at the person. And so sometimes we will actually hire a person part-time and work them full-time temporary for about 6 months, and allows them to see, is this an environment they like? And then also allows us to test drive them as well. And then 9 times out of 10, we bring them on board as a full-time employee there. I report to a lot of people. So I report to investors, okay, but I also report to a board. And so we have a board of 5 board members. I'm one of them. And then we have some observers. And those are basically the investors, investor groups, so they're represented going forward. And we meet pretty consistently. And then we also communicate out to all the various the various shareholders as well. So quite a lot of folks that I technically report to. Yep. Well, it's interesting. So we had a patient, and we don't want to make claims of cure, because the pain is always going to originate, but what we really want to do is stop that pain from traveling, So that's kind of our focus, is really providing that on-demand treatment. Although we did have a patient in the pilot who, for about 3 or 4 months, she didn't use the device anymore. She didn't have pain that was presenting. So then you're thinking, okay, did you break the cycle here? And yeah, exactly. So maybe that'll happen as we continue to go forward. Exactly, yeah, yep. Matt, no questions? Great, well, thanks again.
I'd like to thank you for coming.
Sure, thank you, Marty.
All right,
Appreciate it
thank
very
you.
much.